I am Stefania. I've been researching AI education since 2016, so for a long time. And as you know, this landscape of generative AI use in education has shifted a lot in the past year and a half. So I'm excited to share with you some of the older research I've done and new research, and then also we'll look at some demos of what you could do with the latest models in your classroom today. And I'll give you a lot of resources as well for you, and you'll get to play with it hands-on as well. So let's kick it off. Once I share my slides, I won't be able to see you, and I want this to be interactive. So feel free to unmute and ask questions at any time. I love interruptions, and I want this to be to be a conversation. So let me share my entire screen, and hopefully you can see my slides. If someone could confirm, that would be awesome. So wonderful. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the multimodal future of education. So as some of you might know, 70% of generative AI users are actually from Generation Z. So the young people who grew up with voice assistants are now have a lot of ease transitioning to generative AI applications like Gemini, ChatGPT, and others. And this is important in particular in education because we know in early literacy, we still have a big gap. 70% of 10-year-old can't read or understand a simple story, according to World Bank. Globally, we know that 60% of children and adolescents are behind in reading and math. And in particular, as many of you, I'm sure you know, during COVID, we've seen increasing gaps between the highest and lowest scoring students. This is not just K-12. For higher ed and adult skilling, we know that by 2028, an estimation is that 50% of employees will need reskilling, that it's actually difficult to compete. So 40% of people who who enroll don't earn a degree or a certificate within 6 years. And education is getting to be very costly. So there are a lot of changes that need to happen, and generative AI could provide some solutions. Here's the potential of multimodal AI to transform education. According to a recent study, we know that 89% of students use generative AI to help with homework. 78% of college students recommend generative AI to other students. And a recent study from Intelligence showed that 85% of high school and college students say that Gen AI tools are more effective than learning with a tutor. Now, this is...
Sorry, real
Yeah.
quick, we have a question in the chat. Would you
Yeah.
mind just going in a little bit of a detail about generative AI specifically?
Yeah, generative AI is a family that is encompassing the latest application of AI that are using primarily transformers under the hood. So these are things I think the most common ones that you've probably heard of are ChatGPT or Gemini, like these chatbots where you give it a prompt. It's usually a text prompt, and you tell it oh, help me summarize this article, or give me ideas for a recipe, or tell me how to translate this sentence from English to Romanian. And it generates text. It can also generate code. It can generate images or audio. So it's this family of technologies that are basically using data that they had been trained on, which is it's a vast majority of data, like a lot of the data that exists on the internet or that was archived on Wikipedia and elsewhere. And based on this large quantity of data, they generate new content. And we use prompts, text inputs to guide this generation, to give it instructions. So that's what I mean by generative AI. Great question. So going forward, I was talking about how young people and Gen Z are particularly positioned to not be afraid to use these tools. but also to be most familiar with how to use these tools. So I mentioned that I've been researching AI education for a while. And in 2015, when I joined Media Lab at MIT, I noticed that this phenomenon of children growing up with AI, in particular with voice assistants. Now we have half of households in North America having some sort of voice assistant. And at the time, I was very interested to see how is this generation of youngsters who are growing up with these devices in the home, how do they perceive them? And how does that perception change when they understand how these devices and this technology works? So I did an initial study that showed we had kids from 4.5 to 10 interact with Alexa, with talking dolls like my friend Kayla, with Cosmo, with different chatbots, with Google Home. And after they interact and they played with each of these devices together with their parents, we asked them questions. Like we asked them, how smart do you think it is? Do you think it's smarter than you? Do you think it will remember you? Do you think it's friendly? And overall, let me just hide this. Uh, Overall, what we found was that children perceive the agents as friendly and truthful. We call all of these different examples of voice assistants and smart toys agents. They perceive them as friendly and truthful. Um, and they also expected that different devices would behave differently. So they would say, oh, this Alexa doesn't know, but the one at home knows better because I talk to it more. We also found that age made a difference in how the intelligence of the devices was perceived. So the younger kids, the 4.5 to 6, were more skeptical of how smart these devices are. And the moment that kids would start going to school, like 6 and up, um, all of them would say, no, the voice assistants and the smart devices, the connected devices are smarter than me because they have access to all this data. Now, again, this is a study done when we had voice assistants. As you can imagine, like I haven't redone yet this study with the latest chatbots like ChatGPT and Gemini, but I would expect the results to be even more skewed because these chatbots are much more capable, and we know that this technology is actually coming into voice assistants and is being integrated behind the scenes, like in everything from Siri to Alexa to Google Home and so on and so forth. So the way children perceive and trust these devices matters a lot because that's going to shape how they try to interact with them and also how much they defer certain decisions or what type of questions they try to ask. So it's important as educators, as teachers, to gauge young people's perception of AI before onboarding them to use specific AI application and tailor the explanation and onboarding to match their prior experience and mental models. So, in order to do that, I built this platform called Cognimates, which was the first platform for AI education, free open source. I started working on it in 2016 during my time at MIT. It expands Scratch. So, I was part of the Scratch team. So, it expands Scratch to AI. And this is an example of a project building Cognimates. Can anyone try to guess what this project does? Like, what's the goal of this game on the screen? Any yeah,
Peekaboo?
go ahead. Peekaboo, yeah, it's like hide and seek, peekaboo, exactly. So the student here basically build this program. It's what? It's like very like short number of blocks, like we see 6, 7 blocks. And then she wanted to play peekaboo and hide and seek with the Jiba robot. And then she realized, like, oh, the robot is going to look for her around because it has this turn attention on once, and then if he sees her, he would say, "I see you." But in order for this to be fun and interactive, she had to put the code into a loop, so the robot keeps searching around the room. And I like this example because I think it really encompasses the spirit that my advisor at the time, Mitch Resnick, had, and that was at the basis of Scratch, which made it like a very, very popular platform for kids, which is really start from engagement and from fun. Like this is a fun activity. Like kids love to play hide and seek. They love to play peekaboo. And then once you have like a project that is so easy to start because the code is readable, it's not too many blocks, then you can dive deeper under the hood and understand like, oh, how does the robot learn to see you or not to see you, or to recognize you or not to recognize you? So in Cognimates, similar to Scratch, we had blocks, coding area, a stage, but we had a lot of other extensions. So kids could program Alexa, they could program smart lights, they could use off-the-shelf models for sentiment analysis or image classification. But most importantly, they can train their own. So they can train their own models to recognize particular types of text or particular images, like to have a classifier. So here's an example of models that kids would train. Here they made a model that could classify unicorns versus narwhals. They pick their images of unicorns and narwhal, train the model, it trains pretty fast. And then they could use their custom model of unicorns and narwhals and give in a game new drawings and new images and sort of see how their model is performing. And here we see that in the picture, the model is recognizing that sketch as a unicorn, but it's important to note that the confidence is very, very low. So once we give this type of information to a student, like they start to gain an intuition, like, oh, why is the confidence so low? Maybe because my sketch is not very clear, or maybe it's because in my data I only have pictures of images of unicorns. I don't have any sketches, right? So maybe I need to go back to the data and add more sketches of unicorns and narwhals, and then the model is going to be more confident in its predictions. So it's very important, like when we discuss issues of bias and kind of ethics of AI, to also give the students the tools to know how to fix this. So if we actually expose the whole pipeline of what sort of data do we use for training, how do we train a model, how do we test the model, that gives them a little bit more agency in this process. Here are other examples of projects that students build with their custom models. Here's a game where they would take the webcam and flip the camera. It becomes a microscope, and then they train a model to tell it what it's in their food or in their lunch. Rock, paper, scissors game, or like with text, like they would train a model to recognize like if a text was written in Shakespearean style or not. And yeah, the platform has been online and available. We translated it in several languages. So it's been used around the world, and it's been super fun to see how both teachers and students kind of like engage in what sort of projects they build with it. And I told you that I wanted to see if the perceptions that I initially observed change when young people learn how this technology works. So for that, I did a study, a longitudinal study, where we actually had students from public schools, private schools, community centers engage in several sessions. We asked them initial perception questions like, is it smart? Do you trust it? Then they engage in 3 AI learning activities, and then we ask them the same questions again at the end. And we measure how much the answers have changed. So these were the 3 learning activities they engaged in. They did a text training activity where they would train a model with funny and serious phrases, an image training activity where they would train a model to play the rock, paper, scissors game, and a smart home activity where they would train the model to detect different commands for controlling like home devices. And then we ran this, like I mentioned, in private schools, public schools, community centers, STEM centers. This was all in like the Boston area. And I'll show you a quick video of how it went.
So we were programming robots. You could play rock, paper, scissors. You did rock, paper, scissors into the camera. and on shoot you did one of the motions, and the camera did one of the motions, and it's like rock, paper, scissors, shoot. The computer gets like better as you play the game. Because like us, we might not know everything at first, but if we keep trying, we get better.
Everyone has heard about like machine-based learning or artificial intelligence, and there was a sort of no questions asked for a lot of the more tech-savvy parents. It was like, go for it. Technology is going to be a huge part of their lives, much more so than my life. If it's scary for some people, this AI technology, I totally get it. But as a parent and as a teacher, I thought it was really important because these are skills that 21st century kids need to have.
When my dad was young, he bought a car and took it apart to see how it worked. So you teach people that young how these things that grown-ups mostly program, how it works.
So yeah, it's was quite encouraging to see that after these students participating in the training activities, in the learning activities, they became more skeptical of the AI smarts, right? So for this question of is it smarter than you, we saw many of the responses changing from yes to no or maybe. And there was a significant difference because all of a sudden the intelligence of a voice assistant or a robot was not something magical. They understood how it worked under the hood, that someone would use data and they would train this device on that data, and based on that data the device would make certain predictions. So it was important also to observe like what was the process that allowed children to better make sense of AI. So by having like this sandbox that is Cognimates and block-based programming and accessible training, we actually noticed that they would engage a lot in this process of formulating hypotheses and then testing those hypotheses and then refining their understanding. So it's basically like the scientific process, but we made it much faster, right? Like it was much faster for them to say like, oh, I think it does it because of it detects the edges. Let me see, how can I test that? And then based on the result of the test, they would like, oh, actually it's not based on the edges, it's based on the color. Let me test that. So it allowed them to formulate and test these hypotheses much faster and refine their understanding in the process. So in this study and many other studies, which I'm not going to have the time to cover today, but they're all on my website, we saw it's very important to provide like all sorts of like tools, curriculum, activities for kids, parents, educators, and allow them to engage in AI literacies so they can discover the core concepts of AI technologies, such as like image classification, text classification, and the power they can bring, but also foster critical reflections on how is this technology being used in their home, at school, and also learn how to be creative with it, like how they could engage in creative coding with it as a way of enabling self-expression. So I'm going to skip over this part. I'm going to go a little bit faster because I know we'll want to cover a lot today. But the next study I did was I actually during the pandemic I did many studies with families, and because children was stuck at home and parents didn't really wanted to find ways to engage with their children and learn together, I was able to work with the same community of parents over 2 years in 10 different states, and we did lots of different AI literacy activities. And I realized that one of the bottleneck of continuing this work was the researcher, right? Like me, like being able to be there and ask questions and kind of support their learning. So I wanted to design an AI friend that could do that. And this is a study where I actually tested like what would a copilot for family creative coding, like what should it do? And in order to test that, we actually did what's called a Wizard of Oz. So initially, this copilot, there was someone controlling it under the hood, because we really wanted to see like what would the parents want and what would the kids want before we go and build it. So it was like first like a design exploration. And what we found was that a lot of the families wanted to have this AI friend or copilot like help them generate coding ideas for their new games. Like there's this problem that is very common in programming for youth, which is called the cold start, when you're like going to Scratch or going to Python or to any programming language, and you're like, okay, build something. It's like, what should I build? Like that's the cold start. It's very hard to come up with the initial idea or know where to start. So it was very helpful to have the AI friend kick them off and generate different coding ideas. And these are some of the quotes. One of the participants said, most people would like to code with AI friends because one of the hardest parts of our project is when you start and you run into a wall, you're out of ideas. And another thing that families and kids really wanted was to have this AI friend help them express and elaborate ideas. So if they would say, oh, I want to build like a Pac-Man in a maze, then they probably didn't think yet of how they could detect the edge. So if the AI friend would help them anticipate, like, oh, you'll need to do an edge detection, or you'll need to be able to create clones for the ghost, like, or how do you make the ball move? Like it really helped them speed up their development of the game in this with these questions. The third part was to support their identity. So affirmations went a long way. Whenever either the kids or the parents would do something that worked, just saying like, "Wow, that's super fun," or "Well done," it was very, very helpful. And we saw that all of our participants like spent double the amount of time they would normally spend programming according to the families when they were engaging with the AI friend. So they actually, instead of spending 20 minutes per game, they would spend 40 minutes programming on a game when they had this AI friend companion. It was helpful to have the AI friend also to encourage joint engagement and help kids and parents take turns. Or when the child would be stuck, like to nudge or poke the parent to be like, oh, let's see what mommy or daddy has to say about this, like, or how would they do it differently. And it's also important to learn when it doesn't work, and the fact that we still need parents and educators in the loop. Sometimes it was too distracting, so a very important feature was that they could turn it off at any time. So there was this X button where they could turn off the AI friend at any time. It also didn't do a good job at moderating like siblings turn taking. So when we had families with multiple siblings who were kind of fighting over who's controlling the laptop, there's not that much that the AI friend could do in that situation. When there were more complex concepts, like the concept of clones or broadcasting, there were too many steps to explain. So it wasn't always easy to kind of break down more complex concepts. And that's when having the parents or the educators was very helpful. So based on these like kind of design findings, I then went and actually built like a copilot, because now I knew what sort of features to focus on. So here, like we tested many of the state-of-art models, like GPT-4 and the Gemma models from Google, and saw that they're actually pretty good at interpreting Scratch programs, and then being able to support either explanation, like to explain to a student how the code works, or to give additional ideas on how to improve or make the game more fun, or ask questions like to help with debugging. So we actually created an entire Scratch Copilot evaluation set that we made available publicly. And these are just some examples of how multimodal AI could be used for future of education. When we go away from just using text, and we can use images and videos and audio, like that's the multimodal part, then a world of possibilities is opening up. So for example, in the maker community, in the crafting community, AI could be and is being used as a creative sidekick. These are examples that I found in Instructables, which is a large community of makers. And what people do is that initially they do concept exploration with generative AI. So they start from an idea like, oh, I really like this bird of paradise flower, like what sort of fashion I could do with it. And they make these conceptual maps. And then like they pick an image they really like, and they go from that image of an earring that is like a bird of paradise flower to a 3D printed artifact, generate the 3D design, print it, paint it, and kind of like we see many more uses of generative AI in the maker and crafting world. Another example is in knitting, but it's also being used as a learning companion. So I have two examples here. One is from Adept, where they have like this widget that you could basically use on any page on the internet, like Wikipedia. And if you want to ask questions, like you don't understand like an explanation or a word, or you want to get more context, you could ask questions in context. And even in Gemini, like if you want to learn, like not only get the answer to a question, but you would want to have kind of like a coach, you could ask Gemini, oh, quiz me about a topic. And then I'll get to kind of assess if I studied enough or if I know enough about this topic. It can also help with math. So this is a recent study that together with Nancy Otero we worked on, creating a benchmark of the most common math misconceptions, and then seeing how well like the latest models are at identifying these misconceptions. So if a student is talking to a math AI tutor like Kanamigo or other types of math AI tutors, how good would be a model at picking up the fact that, oh, the student actually is hasn't understood the negative signs, for example, or still doesn't understand linear functions or fraction addition, or so being able to pick up like what sort of misconception is the student still having, and therefore kind of helping the teacher, helping the parent to be like, hey, maybe we should practice or revisit this topic. So I'm gonna stop presenting here, see if you have any questions, and then we'll move into the demos part.
Stefania, yeah, we actually have one question. What was the Maker Community Gen AI tool you referenced? And I think 2 or 3 slides ago?
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily a tool. That was an example on Instructables of people going from brainstorming with image generation on DALL-E to 3D printing the artifact they liked and creating it into real life. There's a long range of tools that are being used in that space. I actually wrote an article on Make Magazine that lists all the tools. So I'm gonna paste it in the chat and also send it to you. Great question. I happy to send the link to the chat. Any other questions before we move to demos?
Yeah, there was one more. Someone had asked how old the participants were in the initiative you mentioned earlier.
How old were the participants in which of the studies?
Sorry, that was a little while ago. I don't remember. Jean, if you can remember which study you were referencing to?
I think it was the art one, Stefania, that you did with the bird into the art production. What age were the people you ran that through?
So that's an example from Instructables, and those were adults. That was not in a study. That was just like me looking at how are people on Instructable communities like using generative AI tools. But I think that was an example, a project built by adults. Now let me quickly send the link right now because I see there are lots of makers in here. So. See how quickly I am at finding it. Here you go. This has all the links and all the tools. I'm putting it into chat. Okay, so keep the questions coming. I'll move on to the demos, and we can chat some more afterwards. So.
Oh, sorry, Stefania. That the age in question was about the students who used the AI buddy. How old were those students?
Yeah, middle schoolers. Most of my studies have been done with middle schoolers.
So great. Okay, so I think all good with questions. I think we can move on.
Awesome. So let's go to some demos. I wanted to show you some demos with the latest models, the latest multimodal models. So let's start with the math one. Open link. So I'm going to give it access to my camera. So let's say I wanted to have, like, imagine I'm putting this webcam like on top of my desk, or like if I have a whiteboard, pointing at the whiteboard or a blackboard. So I'm going to show it like I'm working on these equations, and then it gives me tips. It doesn't give me the answer, but it gives me tips. So it says like, oh, you could subtract x from both sides of the equation. So if I go ahead and do that, then it would give me the next step, right? But then I can also give it more complicated things. Let's see how well it does with this one. So it can help me like understand like how do I find coordinates for points, or if I have like, this is more like sciencey, not really an equation. It's like, oh, what should I put on the other side to balance it? Could do like pretty complicated stuff. So it's nice to have this thing, like imagine like you have the webcam on top of your work desk, and as you're like working through a problem, it could give you like tips and kind of questions to help you solve it, and it reacts to what you're trying in real time. Let's look at one for science. And so this one thinks it's like, sketch shows a moon orbiting the Earth. And then it helps me like formulate all sorts of hypotheses, like what happens if it spins faster? How is the gravity changing? What happens if it spins like slower? And again, like I'm not very good at drawing, but it kind of encourages me to explore and think while I'm sketching and while I'm writing, which I think helps a lot with learning and helps a lot with thinking. And I like that it's so reactive. So all of these demos are, let's see, are using, I have a last one that I'll show you, and then we'll talk about how you make one yourself. This one should be about curiosity, if it's still. So no matter what object I show it's going to start asking me like questions about it. Let's see, I just got a coffee that has a milk drawing on it. What do you think is inside the cup? Do you like the drawing? What color is the animal? What kind of animal is it? Is the cow happy? And yeah, it's like all of these were the code for them, by the way, is open source. You can go and like modify them, and they're all doing the same thing. It's basically using the Gemini model, and it's adding a prompt to say, help the student like solve math equations, and only give like one question at a time, or give 10 questions. Make sure like the language is appropriate for middle schoolers, or depending the age of your students. And now, like if you want, I wanted to encourage you to go and build your own. Let me make sure I'm still sharing the screen. So we're going to use AI Studio for that. And I want to walk you through what you're going to do. Like we're going to go to this link, aistudio.google.com, and you just log in with any like account you want. You don't need to pay, it's free. And once you log in, it's going to look like this. And then you can create your own prompt, like similar to the ones that I have, like, oh, look at images and ask me questions about equations or ask me science questions. Or if you want to start from an example, you could look at the prompt gallery. And in the prompt gallery, you actually have like examples of like how do you ask questions about videos, or how do you ask math, how do you give math support or geometry support. So or like how do you help like me generate worksheets, right? Like maybe I need to do a lot of worksheets, and it doesn't need to be for math, it could be for any other domain. So there are lots of examples. Like here's one. I gave it a video about the American Museum of Natural History, and then it's kind of analyzing the videos, and based on my questions, it's answering to specific questions about the videos. This is a geometry one. So let's spend like 5 to 10 minutes playing with this. And if you need inspiration for the type of prompts that you could use, I'm going to share with you a Colab that has lots of examples of prompts that you could use. So the first thing is, please go to this link and log in. And then the second thing is, if you need inspiration for prompts, look at examples of use cases in education from this document. Yes, I am putting the links in the chat. AI Studio is not is provided by Google. It's using the same model as Gemini. So under the hood is the same model. It's just that it allows you to add documents more easily, and it also allows you to. The question was like, how is AI Studio different than Gemini? It also allows you to modify like the temperature. Let's discuss a little bit like what are these different features that you have on the side. So on AI Studio, like I can type something here like help me generate creative writing ideas. And I can add this, but then I can also add like samples of my writing, so it learns how I normally write things. Or I can add images like, oh, help me generate creative writing ideas based on all these images, or based on these videos, or based on this song that I like, right? So it allows you to more easily add lots of documents, and it has a very large context window. It's 2 million tokens context window. You can also give it system instructions where you tell it like, oh, always use this type of tone, or always make sure this is appropriate for a math class or a writing class. On the side, it actually shows you like what are some of the models that you could play with. That 1.5 Flash is the fastest one. The Pro is like the most performant one. It's not as fast. And then you have like this temperature, which allows you to control how creative the model is. Like if you put temperature 0, that means it's trying to stick as much as possible to the instructions you're giving it. If we increase the temperature, it's going to get more creative. And then it has safety settings that you could control as well, like to and kind of like make sure it's blocking like anything that might not be appropriate. So it has a little bit more features than Gemini, and the biggest difference is this idea, this options of including a lot of documents and different types of artifacts into what the model is seeing, into the context. All right.
I have a question on how does the platform protect like data, and if there's a way to protect intellectual property using the platform?
I know like when you start using it, like there's like terms of services that one has to agree with. As far as I know, like this is meant primarily like for exploration. Like don't know that anyone is using like any of these examples to go and create like a new book or a new album or a new like this is just a way of allowing people to play with the model, but I have not studied the terms of service in detail. So I would say if you're worried about having a company scoop your, I don't know, like idea for something very precious, maybe don't put it there. Yeah, let's see what people want to do with this. Like, we'll give it 5 minutes where each and one of you try, and then we'll do a quick share out of what people have tried, and I'll show you a few other cool things that exist, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm gonna mute myself and stop the video while letting you play with AI Studio, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Hey, Stefania, we have a quick question of if you're not able to access Gemini or Google AI Studio on your device with firewalls and everything. I'm shocked on Infosys we're allowed. I think some educators are having some issues.
They can just send me a private message with about their setup, and I can see if I can help them debug.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And one last question, do you know of any AI resources for foreign language practices?
I know these models are really, really good at translating. I speak 7 languages, so I've been testing them a lot. It's surprising how good they are at translating. So you could give it a try and just kind of give it a text into a different language and ask it to translate or prepare questions. I don't know of any specific resources from the top of my head, but I know that there are much, much better translation in foreign languages. And then there's a model called Whisper that does like text to speech. So then you could actually have it speak to you like in different languages, and then learn the pronunciation. And that one is working really, really well as well. All right. I'm getting more personal messages. So for the people who are having issues like with the school being blocked, I recommend starting an incognito browser. Like if you do Command Shift N or Control Shift N, depending on what operating system you're using, that opens an incognito browser, and then you can log there with a personal account or just create a new account from scratch on Gmail, and hopefully that would work. Um, in terms of, there was a question about science helper and math helper, kid friendly, meaning if it's school appropriate and language is cleared. Um, built this in a very short time, and I have not tested them extensively. But from all my tests, I haven't seen any sort of language that was inappropriate. And it literally just reacts to math equation. And if you're not showing it a math equation, it's not going to tell you anything else. Same about the science drawing. So these are things that you could include in the system prompt that you're giving your application. But yeah, it's a demo that I have not tested extensively. I prepared for presentation to kind of show you what's possible. uh, okay, so we are almost at time. I wanted to see if anyone wanted to share like what they tried and what worked and what didn't um, in AI Studio. Like this is the part where I flip it over to you, and I'm curious like if anyone wanted to share. You don't need to share your screen, but like just any sort of ideas they explored or how their experience was. Feel free to unmute and share out.
I'm a teacher librarian for elementary school, and I saw a really cute idea that I wanted to expand on social media about having a stuffed animal sleepover for kids in the library. And rather than doing my own research, I just put that into chat and said, give me a step-by-step for having a stuffed animal sleepover. And it gave me all of some ideas with some bonus ideas. So it's a very quick thing that I can take to my classroom in the fall with my kids.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. I'm glad you found something you could use. Anyone else?
I've been wanting to design something, so I thought I'd just ask what his suggestions were. So I told it I want to design a folding key cover that has reusable latches. I intend to print it with PLA, which is plastic. And so it went through and gave me some options for the mechanism to open and close it, and said which wouldn't work and which they recommended. Gave me some ideas about the geometry of the latches and things and clearances. And I asked it if it could design one, and I should have known, but it said, sorry, I'm a text-based AI, so I can't really design it for you, but here you can go to these places and use this software. And so it was very interesting.
What was the initial prompt, Aaron? I missed the core domain or like the.
So I asked it to help me design a cover for a key because I need something bigger to turn. I have very weak. And so I told it that's what I wanted with some latches and what material I was wanting to use because of what I had on hand.
I love that example. You could play also like if you change the safety filters, you might get more answers. Like for example, if you stop, because the safety filters are very conservative. So if you reset them and ask it again, it might actually give you more answers. And if you had pictures of like the door or like any sort of like the setting in which you want to do this design, that I think that would also be helpful.
I see. And how about the temperature? Because I left it at midpoint, wherever it was. Will that have much impact in this case, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, because this is a design, I would recommend kind of trying with temperature 1 and then temperature 0, and then kind of see if you like it, how creative it is, or if you want it to stick as close as possible to your instructions. It's a great question.
Thanks.
Mary, did you wanted to share as well? I saw you unmuted.
Hi, yeah, I when I heard about ChatGPT, our school had an introduction, so I had asked it, for an itinerary. So it's for personal, not for school, but I was curious how it differed from ChatGPT. So I asked it to give me an itinerary of New Mexico, 5 days for, my age group. And I got it back, but I noticed that ChatGPT was much more elaborate than this was. This was kind of just gave me things I could do during the day. ChatGPT gave me hotels, it gave me restaurants, it gave me options. Yeah, I was I preferred ChatGPT. That's what I was kind of doing, was comparing the two. So I
Yeah.
also did the math thing, and I liked that the math thing I'd explained why my answer, and I liked how it kind of guided me to, my thinking was right or wrong. And so I did like that part. But as far as for itineraries, I would go with ChatGPT.
Yeah, I love this example. And there are a couple of websites where you could test all the different models and chatbots depending on the type of question you have. So let me try to see what's the latest one that I can share in the chat. But there are websites where it compares Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini and like Llama, which is an open source one. So depending on the type of questions or scenario, like you could find the best tool for you, right? I don't think it's like a one solution fix it all. It's more like, oh, for this scenario, this works better. Because I want to be able to add lots of documents or images or videos, or for this other scenario, this works better and I'm more familiar with it. So it's kind of like early days of search online, right? When we were like, oh, which resources is best? And it's the same here. So I think it's this one, NetDev. There are a couple of websites where you can compare all existing chats and then see which one works better for the type of question you have. Cool. So I'll put that in the chat. We are almost at time. I'm sorry, I don't think we got to fix all the troubleshooting. If the school administration blocks like Gmail domains, like that's a little bit hard. Like I don't really know what to do right now. I would recommend using maybe a different browser and see if you get the same issue. But hopefully this gives you like even more tools into your toolbox. And what I would like you to take away, it's more like the mindset and the examples that I showed from my studies, which is think about this technology as a object to think with, right? Like it's just a tool. And then we are learning as like educators, as researchers, as kids, as parents. So the reason I like the video demo so much and it's like I want to be able to be in control and still like learn and still create things and still like do equations by hand, right? There's lots of research that shows that we understand and learn math much better when we handwrite, for example. So no matter which of the models you choose to use or tool, or like I think like what I would love for you to take away is this heuristic of like how do we put the agency in the learner's hands, and have like a healthy skepticisms of these tools, yet not be afraid to try them out and kind of see when and how they're useful and when they're not. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for joining. I'll share.
One last question.
Yeah.
How do you encourage users to stay one step ahead of the proliferation of chat and Gen AI tools? How do we beat them?
How do we beat them? It's a good question. I don't think in the terms of beating them, like it's kind of
Sorry, beat was the wrong word. Stay informed.
Yeah, stay informed. There is a organization for teachers. It's called AI for K-12. Let me pull up these are by the way, like all my publications and projects and a lot of things I shared are on my website, and you can have a look there. For the organization that I mentioned, it's AI4K12.org. And they have a lot of resources for educators. They also have a mailing list and a conference. So this is a great resource to kind of stay in the loop and stay informed, like about the latest that is happening. And yeah, I think in general, like being curious, like, and doing regular searches. Like, I'm subscribed to several newsletters, like the AI for K-12. There's another one from Schmidt Futures. Let me try to find the link to that as well. And then in terms of AI, there's this newsletter I get every day. It's called Bytes. It's like the latest tools, like in all sorts of domains. I don't always read it, but sometimes I glance at it. So it kind of like, it keeps me informed. It's overwhelming and there's a lot of noise. So if you don't know everything, that's totally okay too, right? I'm a big fan of just-in-time learning. Like if you have a project, kind of like the key design, or like if you have a specific project where you think it could be useful, then you could learn like what's relevant for your project at that moment in time. And oh yeah, I wanted to show you this too. So Claude just launched Artifacts. So this reminds me of early days of Scratch. So this is a game that someone has built, and if I like the game, it's kind of hard to play with gravitation and everything. I can actually go and see how it's built and remix it. So where's the remix button? Oh, it's hidden at the bottom over here. So similar how Scratch projects, it allows you to see how other people program something and modify it. It's the same with this type of projects that people build with Claude. Like I can go and see like, oh, I'm not verified right now. How did they build this? And then it would show me the prompt, and I can go and modify the prompt. So if you go to Claude Artifacts, like you can see, you can create your own artifact, or you could see what other people what other artifacts people have built. So this is another way of kind of getting inspired, see like what the community is building, and staying in the loop. Yeah, I'm glad it was informative. It was wonderful to meet you all. I wish we had more time for debugging, and like it's always hard to do some